Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
They were building positions in there
if
for a
anything
fight.
happened to us, by the time anyone got to us,
I think it was chaos.
the weather was so bad there would be
I used to
nobody
run
left.
with boots full of blood.
And the next thing I hear was alarms,
Chances of
screaming.
survival were very, very slim.
The soldiers didn't want to go into the ambushes, so they'd send the kids in first. And so he was sent in first into an ambush and he got shot in the stomach.
It was very hard for me, very hard for my family.
And the plane burst.
Proud of the crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm
To
doing.
volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Cameron Baird is an Australian icon, recipient of both the Medal for Gallantry and the Victoria Cross. Cam Baird was killed on 22 June 2013. For the heroic actions during which he lost his life, the corporal from the 2nd Commando Regiment became the 100th Australian to receive a Victoria Cross, the 4th Victoria Cross for Australia, and the first of that order to receive it posthumously. I spoke with Cameron's father, Doug, about the life and death of his son and how Kay and Doug have dealt with his passing going forward. I'm Alex Lloyd, speaking today with Doug Baird. Doug, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Alex, for having me along.
Doug, we're here to talk about your late son, Cameron, but I wanted to go back to the beginning. Where did you meet your wife, Kay?
It's an interesting story. I met Kay. She was a champion ballroom dancer, and it was at one of those particular functions that I actually met her. I couldn't dance for nuts. I went along because I thought I might be able to meet a nice young lady, and was immediately attracted to Kay because I thought she had lovely legs.
So you two danced along, and when did you get married?
We became girlfriend, boyfriend, and we knew each other for probably 3.5, 4 years, and we got married in 1971.
And where were you living at this stage?
I was living in Melbourne, and probably about 5 or 6 k's from where Kay was living. I was living in a place called Fawkner, a suburb of Fawkner, and Kay lived in Coburg.
And then you, a few years later, start a young family. When is Brendan born?
Brendan was actually born just prior to us going to Tasmania, and we went to Tasmania at the start of 1976. So Brendan was certainly born just prior to that.
And then he has a younger brother come along the way about 5 years later.
That is correct, yes. Cameron was born in Burnie, in Tasmania, and we lived there, Cameron lived there for about 2.5 years before we moved back to Melbourne.
Can you tell me a bit more about the childhood Cam would have had growing up in Melbourne?
Oh, look, Cameron had many friends, and they were very wide-ranging. There was guys that were exceptionally good at sport. There were others that were basically bookworms, and Cameron had the ability to be able to mix and be friends of both. So his friends were certainly across a very, very broad range.
What subjects interested him at school?
Subjects that interested Cameron in school was obviously music, which was a very strong passion of his. His obvious was sport, and I think everything else fell very, very distance away.
And when you say sport, you're quite the former footy star yourself. Was he looking up to his father, following in his footsteps?
Oh, look, I think probably from a very young age, Cameron was a Carlton supporter, as was his brother, as was our whole family. And we took Cameron to Carlton games not long after he was able to walk, and he was born and bred Blue supporter, and obviously hoped to one day play for him.
And that was his first goal, his first passion to strive for, not anything military, it was football.
Yes, his football was his key. He loved it, and from a very young age, he won just about everything, every award that was available. Best and fairest in the competition, club best and fairest goal kicking. No matter what it was, Cameron won. But his passion was certainly to play AFL football, and unfortunately, later on there, he suffered a very severe shoulder injury. As a matter of fact, it was so severe the clubs decided they weren't quite prepared to take a risk on a young 6'4", 100 kilo type player, and that's what kept him out of the army initially too, as well, was that shoulder injury.
When did you first hear, Mum, Dad, I want to join the army?
I didn't hear the word dad. It was certainly spoken to his mother because I'm sure that he would have expected me to try and talk him out of it. But in listening to the conversation from his mother, what he explained to her was that he'd made his mind up. And I guess like all parents, you want to support your child. So even though it was probably against my grain at the start, I said, yep, I'll support you, whatever you want to do.
And once Cam finishes his basic, he is posted to the 4th Royal Australian Regiment, which is reforming as bracket Commando. Did you have an appreciation at that period when he gets this posting that he's getting into something potentially more serious?
Oh, most definitely. We knew at that particular point that the 4 RER was in its last days, and the 2nd Commando Regiment was being formed as a Special Force unit. Cameron was at the right spot at the right time. He'd gone through his basic and was awarded Most Outstanding Soldier, so he was put at the top of the list, and he was given the opportunity to go to 4 RER at that time, knowing full well that it was going to rumble into a Special Force regiment.
Is there a distinct memory of farewelling him to go off to basic before he gets to that point?
Yes, there is, and it's very strong in my mind, and I see it time and time again. I see a young fella bowling out with all the other recruits with a very short haircut, a smile on his face, waving to all the parents standing at the roadside as they boarded the bus that was going to take them to Kapooka to start their army life.
And is there a complimentary memory when he's off to his first deployment overseas, to East Timor?
Yeah, look, that was one of excitement, and I think probably the excitement was mainly coming from him. I think his mother at that stage there wasn't totally sure. We only basically knew what we read in the paper, and we were led to believe it was along the lines of peacekeeping. But the regiment did see a little bit of action. One contact was made, and I think that was the one that Cameron missed out on. Personally, he wasn't on that particular patrol, and I think listening to the stories of the others that were in that first contact, that was something that he really wanted to do, but the opportunity never presented itself while on that particular tour to East Timor.
While he's in East Timor, though, he does get that greater opportunity through great tragedy when 9/11 occurs. Do you remember where you were on that day?
Yes, we do. It's amazing. Like I think most people do. Look, we were actually sitting at home, had the TV going, not taking any notice of it whatsoever, and then this news break came over. Initially, we didn't take a lot of notice, and we realised just what had actually happened and what possibly could be the consequences rolling on from that. And I think that's when it got our attention that this could have an effect on Cameron at some stage in the near future.
When did you first speak with Cameron after 9/11?
Oh, look, we spoke to Cameron pretty much not long after that actually happened, because at that point we were able to make contact, we were able to speak on the phone quite regularly. And at that point there, I think that they were feeling that there was going to be possibly an opportunity, that this was going to lead to something more serious. At that point, nobody knew as to what, to where and to how, but I think they had a sense that there was something coming, and certainly something did.
Well, it did. His first deployment to the Middle East is in 2003. While Kay was supportive early on, and you might have had some reservations when Cam first went into the forces, when the Iraq deployment comes up, how did both you and Kay react at that stage?
Look, at that point there wasn't a lot about it on the news, and we weren't over concerned. We were worried about the so-called Scud missiles that was in the paper. We were a little bit worried about the possibility of the gas. But apart from that, it appeared as so that the combined force of America, Australia, and all their allies were going to be able to steamroll over the top of Saddam Hussein, which proved to be, and a lot of that focus on how well the Iraqi were going to fight never materialised to anything, and they folded like a pack of cards.
How were those first few conversations when Cameron was calling from the Middle East, calling home?
Yeah, look, those early calls were very sensitive, simply because that's the way the Army treated it, and they were monitored. And we were basically told that we couldn't say, or we couldn't ask, I should say, specific questions. If we did, and Cameron either didn't answer, or the line was cut off, and that meant that the person monitoring the call had put a stop to it for 30 seconds, and then we come back online again, and we knew very well that subject wasn't to be broached. So.
I won't delve into Cameron's time overseas too much. I've had the privilege of speaking with other 2nd Commando Regiment veterans, guys like Eddie Robertson, so they've given me a first-hand account of what Cameron would have been seeing over there and what he would have been doing. But I am going to jump ahead to November 2007, where Cameron performs an incredibly heroic series of actions that earn him the Medal for Gallantry. When do you first hear about the medal and the actions Cam took that day?
That Medal for Gallantry was one that he'd spoken to his brother about, and he'd spoken to his brother along the lines of, don't tell mum and dad, just keep this one to yourself, because at that point he'd received it through the mail that he was going to be put up for this particular award, the Medal for Gallantry, which is our 3rd highest bravery award, and Cameron wasn't sure as to whether he was going to take it, so it wasn't widely known what he was actually going to do, and as time went past, he was basically talked into it to take it on behalf of the regiment as a recognition the day that Luke Worsley was killed. And it wasn't all about Cameron receiving the Medal for Gallantry as an individual. It was about acknowledging what that group had done on that particular day and the loss of Luke and the 2nd Commando Regiment.
Also, I want to take a slight step back here in that Cameron chooses to join the army because that appeals to him as a career option when footy is no longer tenable. Then he finds himself in the Commandos, then he's winning quite a prestigious award as part of action overseas in a new era of warfare for our country. It's a dramatic escalation. Is there any other military history in the family to contextualise this, or is Cameron unique among the Bairds?
No, our family has a very strong military history. My father served in World War II, and his father served in World War I. Brendan served for a short period of time as well. So Cameron, I know, had a conversation with his grandfather. Specifically what they spoke about, I don't know. But I'm sure that probably if Cameron gained anything as to what he may expect in a conflict where there's some bullets being fired at you, that would have come from his grandfather.
Can I go on a brief tangent here and ask what areas your grandfather and father served in their respective wars?
Yeah, both were infantry. I guess probably Grunt's running the family, and Dad served in New Guinea, and he was fighting the Japanese up there, and Dad had a similar situation to Cameron. That towards the end of the war there, that they were pushing the Japanese back, and the Japanese had a pillar box, a machine gun in that particular pillar box, and my father's patrol was held down by this gun, and my father stepped forward and took a grenade and crept up on this pillar box and threw the grenade into the pillar box, and to his amazement, the Japanese grabbed the grenade, threw the darn thing back out and blew him off his feet. So he made a second attempt, and this time he posted it nice and deep in there, and that was the end of the Japanese, and he was put up for a bravery award for that particular action. But the war finished 2 weeks later, and the paperwork was not followed through, and the joy and the excitement of the war ending, that was just lost. So I'm sure that probably Cameron would have understood and would have known a little bit about that, which certainly would have had an impact on him at some stage, I would have thought.
I can imagine. And what about Brendan's service? Was he also a grunt?
No, Brendan had a strong passion for vehicles, heavy vehicles, and was a driver, he was based up at Albury-Wodonga at Bandiana, and unfortunately he was in a holding pattern there and spent over 3 to 4 months, and they were doing nothing. They were sweeping the boozer out, and they were cleaning the libraries. And the opportunity came that they could sort of like move back out and become a reservist, and because there was nothing happening for him, and Brendan took that option. So he's part of the military in that side of it was a little bit on the short side, but that was not due to his wanting. It's just the way that panned out.
Coming back to Cameron, I've been told anecdotally that he acquired an incredible reputation in the Special Forces world over the years. He receives the Medal for Gallantry in 2007. He's been with the Commandos in this high-pressure environment for some time now. Are there any signs of him slowing down? Any indication of him moving on to a safer or different line of work?
No, definitely not. Cameron worked in reverse, to be honest. Cameron came through the rank as a corporal, and then obviously, a lance corporal, then into the rank of corporal. And he remained with that rank for quite a few years, even though he was pushed to become a sergeant. He knew in his own mind that if he took the rank of sergeant, there was every chance that he would be taken from the battlefield and would be used in other areas, and that certainly wasn't what he wanted. And it was only towards the very, very end that he actually started his sergeant's course. But he knew too that that last tour was going to be his last, so promotion was obviously the next thing, and it wasn't going to interfere with the fact that he would be restricted to go onto the front line, because there wasn't going to be a front line for him.
And I guess he's 26 when he won the Medal for Gallantry, so still peak youth, peak fitness, and wanting to serve his country in that capacity as long as he can, while he can.
Oh, he certainly was, and I think that word iconic has been used a number of times, and from the information that we've got from soldiers who served with him on many different deployments, said the same thing, that Cameron was always up for a good scrap, and I think probably that was where he's seen his strength. He rose to a team commander, and it was through the leadership that he displayed that a lot of the hard jobs got done, and we're two commandos known as the door kickers. They're at the very, very sharp end of the fighting and do all the heavy lifting. So he was in his environment and in that type of workload, and he never looked like he was going to slow down. Even though he was roughly 100 kilos and 6'4", he didn't probably have the body of a soldier that jumps out of a helicopter or parachutes. But yeah, his body was slowly breaking down, and I think that's why he was feeling the pinch. And that's why he was happy to start the sergeant's course. And if that meant coming off the front line, well, so be it.
Can you describe when you first learned of Cameron's death?
That's very vivid. It's stamped in our minds. It was a Saturday night. The rugby was on. Australia was playing a test match against something, and I was just watching it in the bedroom, and the knock came at the door, and Kay happened to get to the door before I did, and we knew from previous experience talking to Cameron what to expect, that if he was injured severely, as a family we would receive a phone call notifying us of that. If he was to be killed, you would have 2 or 3 army people would come to the home, and they would advise you before it's made public. So he said that if you hear of a soldier that's been killed in the field, it's not me. So the doorbell rang that particular night. Kay answered the door, and there was 3 soldiers there with their hats in their hand, and she knew, just like I did, that he'd been killed.
And I imagine the days that followed were very long, as the public is gradually informed. And there's the difficulties of funeral arrangements, the body coming back home, and defence wanting to juggle the media the right way, because Cameron was, for Special Forces at least, well known.
Yeah, look, it was a very long process. It was, as a matter of fact, I think there was 3 services, and that didn't include the service in Afghanistan, leaving the ramp service there. We had a service at the Richmond when his body arrived in Australia. We had a service 2 days later at 2 Commando in Sydney, and eventually the body was brought home to Queensland, and we had the final service, which we buried Cameron in Queensland. So it was a long process. It was a process that the army machine rolled in and took control of most things, and we had minders basically 24/7. We had them probably for 2 to 3 weeks after that, and we were initially told people stayed with us just to make sure we were okay. And so that was a pretty horrific period for us.
It's amazing, though, to have that kind of network in that period. I'm young, I'm childless, I can't possibly understand or relate to the grief you would have gone through at that time.
Look, to be honest with you, we have a lot of people say that they understand, and they say that with respect, and they think they're saying the right thing. But look, we acknowledge that, we smile, and we thank them for their kind words. But deep down, we know that they don't really know, and the only people who do know are parents who have lost a daughter or have lost a son. It's not the way it should work. It's the parents should die before the child. So it's a very unique type situation, and unless you've been through it as a parent, you really don't know the pain that parents do suffer.
Cameron passes in June 2013, and it's then in February 2014 he's awarded the Victoria Cross for Australia. Cameron is the 100th Australian to receive a Victoria Cross, the 4th to receive specifically the Victoria Cross for Australia, and of those 4, the only person to receive it posthumously. When did you first learn that the award was in the works?
That's a very interesting story, and if I could just take it back a fraction, was that when we were down in Canberra, we had a number of people around us, and I can distinctly remember sitting with Brendan Nelson at the time, and he was reassuring us that, the War Memorial were going to do everything to make things a lot easier, and he said words along the lines of, there's more to come with this than what you know at the moment. And at that point, our minds were still very numb. We were acknowledging people, but we weren't really listening. We weren't comprehending. We weren't taking things in. So we really wasn't sure what he was actually getting at. And then we had a call from Army, and it was the Chief of Army, and he was asking whether he could come and see us at our home. And of course, naturally we agreed, and we thought, well, yep, he's coming in 2 days. What's he coming for? We thought, well, he can't give us any bad news because we've already got that. Chief of Army normally only comes if he's bringing something significant, some sort of award possibly, or something that's very personal to be told, but normally that would be handled within the regiment. So we started to put 2 to 2 together, and we started to pick up on what people were saying. And it was only then, about a day out, we thought maybe he's coming to offer Cameron a Victoria Cross. And as it turned out, the doorbell rang on that morning, and there was the Chief of Army, which was David Morrison at the time, and his aides. They came in, they sat down, and they were very quick to point out that they were here to see whether the Baird family would accept a Victoria Cross on behalf of Cameron. And I think that when those words came out, we were in two minds. We were a little bit shocked, even though we were anticipating something like that may have come about. But when it did come about, what were we going to do? We'd already decided that we'd take in consideration everything, if that was the case, and we knew that Cameron had knocked back the Medal for Gallantry and the reasons he'd knocked it back. Then we thought long and hard, and we thought, well, 2 Commando on its 62, 63 years of its history does not have a Victoria Cross recipient. So once again, we thought, well, we're taking this not just for Cameron, we're taking it for the team, we're taking it for the company, and we're taking it for the regiment. So we actually accepted the Chief of Army's offer, and it was decided then and then that we would be flying to Canberra, where Tony Abbott would meet us privately, and he would make the announcement on the floor of Parliament that Cameron was going to be Australia's 100th, and the Victoria Cross was going to be awarded to him. That particular day that we went to Canberra, or the day before, when we were told that the Victoria Cross, and we accepted it, it was all hush-hush. We couldn't tell anybody. We couldn't tell any relations. It had to be kept secret so that the Prime Minister could make the announcement. So that morning, a big car turns up, and we're all piled into the car, and we drive off down to the Coolangatta airport there, and we don't go to the main part. We're going through this big hangar, and we approach it, and these two guys opened the door up. It was something like out of a James Bond episode. We drive through, and we go right through this hangar. We come out the other side, and there is the Prime Minister's private jet. The engines are running. It's just waiting for us to get out of this vehicle. We get out of the vehicle, we get in the plane, our luggage is put in the plane, the door goes up, and the plane takes off almost within 5 minutes. We arrive in Canberra. We have a meeting with Mr Abbott in his office, and about a half an hour later in Parliament, at 11 o'clock, he calls a special closure, and he wants to make the announcement, which he does, which is that Cameron is the 100th Victoria Cross for Australia.
I vividly remember the reading of that announcement by Tony Abbott, Prime Minister at the time. It was a very powerful, very moving day, and I think most Australians would recall that day if they'd had the news on, and would have had similar feelings that I do.
Yeah, look, there was a lot of feeling that day, and I think probably from us being on the inside and hearing the story of what happened down at 2 Commando that particular day, that the soldiers were called into this rather large building in front of a TV, and they at that point knew nothing. And when the announcement was made, apparently the place shook, and I think that was just respect, that one of their own had received a Victoria Cross.
And how does Brendan react to all of this? Of course, he grieves with you and Kay in the months and years that follow, but I can imagine a lot of pride for his brother's achievement and recognition.
Yes, Brendan is very much an independent person, and he likes his privacy, and so this was something extremely foreign to him. He was very shaken because they were very close. It took a few days to settle in and in his mind that this had actually happened, and to accept that his brother wasn't going to be coming through that door ever again. And I think in Brendan's own way, he was strong. He took the lead on behalf of the family. He knew that both his mother and father at that stage were pretty much shook up and probably couldn't speak the way they would like to speak. So he took that upon himself to, even though he was feeling the pinch and feeling the grief, he took it upon himself to be the spokesperson for the family, and he spoke down at the press after the Prime Minister announced that. So Brendan now is in a situation of acceptance, but having said that, I think it's deeply, he's still very much affected by it, as we all are, and we don't see any time frame on that. We see light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't know whether we're ever, when and if we're going to get to that end of that light. And so we all struggle in our own little way, and as strong as what you want to be as a family unit, it is very hard to deal with. And I think Brendan probably sheds a tear like the rest of us, but he does that in private.
Well, Doug, I have to say, I think the decision you all made to accept the Victoria Cross was incredibly noble and self-sacrificing. Our other 3 Victoria Cross for Australia recipients, Mark Donaldson, Ben Robert-Smith, Daniel Kieran, we've used that word iconic, and they are icons. They're public figures, speaking and appearing at all kinds of functions. You and Kay represent Cameron in that respect. Rather than being able to grieve amongst yourselves and close friends, you're in the public spotlight a lot, and there's this kind of unique pressure on you. Did you fully comprehend what you were putting your hand up for, in a way, when you both chose to accept this award on Cameron's behalf?
No, in the short answer, no, we didn't. We felt that by accepting the award, it was, as I said earlier, it was recognition for the regiment, the company, and his particular team. But we also knew that with the Victoria Cross comes a fair amount of commitment to do certain things. We had an option right from the very start that we could have decided to shut the door and do absolutely nothing. But we felt that probably that's not what Cameron would want us to do. We had an opportunity to be able to initially speak about Cameron and our feelings, and it was seen as a little bit of therapy, and it certainly helped us a hell of a lot. I think as time went on that we felt that we had an obligation to fulfil some of the obligations of the Victoria Cross, and although we're not a living recipient of it, we didn't do the deed that Cameron did do, but we now speak on his behalf, and it's been absolutely enormous, the response we get from the general public, that they feel as though we've done the right thing, and the things we now talk about is not centrally on Cameron. It's about the regiment. It's about what the sacrifices they've made. They're the highest decorated regiment in our army over the last 10 years, but they've suffered enormously. They've had the most killed in action. They've lost many good soldiers. They've had over 200 seriously wounded, and we now see the regiment suffer for their actions, and we're able to speak about that. We're able to raise some money to help them out. So, it's very, very different.
Tell me about Cam's cause.
Look, Cam's Cause is a great little institution, and I use the word little because you'll understand when I finish telling this story that it came about that Cameron's grade 6 primary school teacher happened to be shopping one morning and bumped into an old schoolmate of Cameron's that he taught at the same time, and one thing led to another, and they said, well, look, why don't we sort of like get, a few guys together and we'll see if we can sort of like raise a couple of, $1,000 or whatever it may have been, so we can put that to a charity which Cameron had done a lot of work for in the past. So they got together and they thought, well, okay, realistically, if we can get 100 people, if we can raise $5,000, that will be an absolute great effort. As it turned out, that particular first function, they had to close the doors at the venue with 275 because it couldn't fit any more in. Instead of raising $5,000, they raised in excess of $35,000, of which they gave the Commando Welfare Trust within 48 hours of that raising that money. They donated $30,000, which was the biggest individual donation to Commando Welfare Trust for probably 2 years. So the charity, that was the start of the charity, and the charity has now got 4 members. It consists of Mr. Andrew Harrison, which is the grade 6 primary school teacher, Chris Dyer, great friend Rick Green, and Dan Carroll. And all these 4 people are completely volunteers. They do all the work and do not take 1 red cent. They pay their own way when they go to a function, and that's why Cam's cause is small, but it comes from the heart, and we're now able to generate regular money through donations, through functions, through merchandise to look after the 2 Commando soldiers that have served and are suffering not just mental but physical injury. And Cam's cause supplies little things like a canoe or some fishing rods, or pays for accommodation for soldiers to go away for a weekend somewhere and camp on the river. The soldier then feels a lot more relaxed, and sometimes he speaks and he tells the problems that he's got, so it opens it up. We are able to supply some money to have professionals come along to speak to those soldiers, and we have a situation now whereas within 2 Commando itself they have a wellness room which has a number of exercise machines which help those who are recovering from wounds, and there's drink machines, and there's a lot of other little personal things in there which Cam's cause has been able to supply. And from that point of view, we're working extremely hard to make sure that soldiers that do come back, that are looked after, that do have problems. So that's what Cam's cause is about.
Doing all this hard work with Cam's cause and the public speaking and the book, which I'll get to in a moment, are you still finding that therapeutic, or are you looking beyond that and just focusing on the end of the tunnel?
No, look, to be honest with you, I'm finding that by talking about it, it's certainly helpful for myself. I can't speak for my wife or my other son, but it's how I personally view it. It's certainly helpful, but I think at the end of the day, there will be a line drawn in the sand. We just can't continue at the rate and the pace we're going at the moment. We're not young anymore. We realise there's a lot more work to be done, but until we can get ourselves into a far better position, we'll keep going as best we can, and we'll do what's necessary to help others, as what Cameron would want.
And Cameron's legacy has been further solidified with the release in October 2017 of a book, The Commando, The Life and Death of Cameron Baird VC, MG. Can you tell me a bit more about the book and your involvement in it?
Yeah, look, the book's been a long-term project that not long after it was announced that Cameron was the 100th Victoria Cross recipient, that some offers started to come in regard to doing a book, and that was far too early for us to even consider. But over the years, that offers come from 3 to probably about 7. So we, as a family, sat down and we decided that, there may be an opportunity now that we're a better understanding of things and we're more in a better space, that this is possibly the time to do it. It was a great opportunity, not just to tell Cameron's story, because there was people that Cameron went to school with had no idea what he did in the army, and there was guys that he served with in the army that had no idea what he did in his private life prior to joining the army. So we've seen this as a great opportunity to be able to speak and to tell Cameron's story right from his birth in Tasmania, but we also seen it as an opportunity to be able to tell the story of 2 Commando. So the book itself, although it's called The Commando and it's the life and death of Cameron Baird VC, MG, the thrust of the whole thing is the sharing between Cameron Baird made 2 Commando and 2 Commando made Cameron Baird. So we see it as a split, and we're very satisfied with the book, and we hope people will buy it and support it, because the money raised from there will eventually trickle its way down to our soldiers.
Well, Doug, I've met a lot of men and women through the course of doing this podcast that I find an inspiration. Cam's story is obviously inspiring, but you and Kay never put on the uniform, yet you're doing so much not just to remember your son privately, but to share his memory with the public, and to use his award, his Victoria Cross, as a platform, as you've described, for the benefit of 2nd Commando Regiment. It's incredible, and I admire you greatly. Thank you for talking about this subject so openly, and for coming on the podcast to speak with me today.
Look, thank you very much for your time, and it's very much appreciated by the family, and thanks at times doesn't seem enough, but that's all we can offer. So thank you very kindly.
It was an honour to speak with Doug about his son. The biography about Cameron, the Commando, is by Ben McKelvey and published by Hachette. You can contact us about this episode by emailing podcast@lifeonthelinepodcast.com. Our website is www.lifeonthelinepodcast.com, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thanks for listening, and, as always, lest we forget.
I rise to solemnly inform the House, in the presence of family and our military chiefs, that the 100th Victoria Cross has been awarded to an Australian. This award is to the late Corporal Cameron Baird, already an iconic figure in our Army, who had earlier received the Medal of Gallantry. As the citation reads, his Victoria Cross is for most conspicuous acts of valour, extreme devotion to duty, and ultimate self-sacrifice at Gorchak village in Uruzgan province, Afghanistan, as a commando team leader. He was on his 5th Special Forces tour when he was killed in the action for which he was awarded the Victoria Cross. On the 22nd of June last year, in the first phase of the engagement, Corporal Baird and his team came under heavy fire on 3 separate occasions from well-prepared enemy positions. In the initial encounter, 6 enemy combatants were killed and weapons caches were captured. In subsequent encounters, Corporal Baird charged enemy positions and neutralised them with grenade and rifle fire. By drawing fire on himself repeatedly, he enabled other members of his team to regain the initiative. In the second phase of the engagement, Corporal Baird then led an assault on an enemy-held compound. On 3 separate occasions, under heavy fire, he forced the door of a building. Twice he was forced to withdraw, to reload, and then to clear his rifle. For the 3rd time, he entered the building, again drawing fire away from his comrades, who were able to secure the objective. Tragically, he was killed in this final assault. Madam Speaker, words can hardly do justice to the chaos, confusion and courage that were evident that day. Today we grieve with Cameron Baird's parents, Doug and Kay, his brother Brendan and his nephews Riley and Max. You have lost a son, a brother, an uncle. Our country has lost a citizen, a soldier, a hero.